transition is not a magic button, unfortunately. It is a decision that you wake up, and like anything else in your life, you say, I'm going to try something new. And if it makes me feel better, fantastic. That's part of me moving forward. If it doesn't, all right, cool. Like one step back. There's a lot of this entire process that is incredibly, totally not permanent, and is just finding yourself and finding what makes you feel more yourself.
In this episode of In the Shadows Being Transgender, Allie's story.
Welcome to the second episode of In the Shadows, Being Transgender. My hope is to shed light on difficult issues right here in our community. I need to apologize that it's taken me a few weeks to post this podcast. After the first episode, I received a lot of positive feedback, and according to my statistics, it's had quite a few downloads. I hope you've all found the information helpful and interesting. But along with those positive comments, I've received a significant amount of negative comments as well. And I expected that, but not to the degree that I've experienced. And I'm just an outsider in this circle. Needless to say, I've been a little bit shocked and even wondered briefly if I should continue this series. The topic of being transgender is complicated. There are religious influences, which I can respect since I grew up in a small community with strong traditional beliefs. I have a lot of love for those people. Many have expressed that they just don't understand, which is why I feel obligated to continue sharing the stories of those who have trusted me. It's not my intention to persuade anyone to change their beliefs, but I do hope to provide some insight into the lives that many struggle to understand. I ask, if you're listening, to please do so with an open mind and with love for all people. The people I've interviewed so far are just really awesome, kind people, and I hope that I'll have the privilege of calling each of them a friend as the years go by. Joining me today is Allie Richardson. Allie is a transgender woman who lives here in Springfield, and she's graciously agreed to share her story with us. Thank you for being here, Allie.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So, Allie, you said you're a transgender woman. For those of us who don't know, tell us what that means.
Okay. There tends to be a lot of confusion sometimes about what terms mean, and to best describe things with respect to everybody's identities. We talk about the gender that you're assigned at birth as compared to, what your gender is, so, what a doctor gives to you tends to be right for, 99% of the population, but for the rest of us, it's not that easy. So when I say that I am a transgender woman, what that means is that I was assigned male at birth. The doctor looked at me and said, "Oh, look, a little boy, hooray." And growing up, that just never resounded, that never felt right. Which just is such a small way to put it. It didn't feel right, but it's just somewhere deep in your core. It's just something that, felt wrong. And and so I suppose when you get older and you have the ability to make that decision for yourself, that is, that's kind of when you say to the world, hey, that's not correct. And let's change things up a little bit.
So when you were little, you felt this way?
It's tough to say that, yes or no. It's a bit more complex, in my case, at the very least. A lot of the narrative follows, kids like these trans people that you'll see in the media. They're like, "Oh, I've known since I was 3 years old," and that's entirely possible because that is around the time that your gender solidifies in your identity. For me, I have been dealing with this conflict inside of myself. since about that time. And I can't say that when I was a kid, I would have come out and said, hey, mom, dad, this is, who I am. This is what I feel like. For me, it was something that I saw the rest of society around me interacting with me in a way that showed that I was not allowed to show that side of myself. And so it wasn't so much that I necessarily consciously felt different, but I started policing myself when I was very, very young. And I started looking at behaviors that I knew I was not allowed to show and to perform and to feel.
For example,
It's hard to pinpoint. No, actually, no, I do remember very distinctly, when I was 7 or 8 years old, I remember thinking to myself, like, you can't walk the way that you're walking for whatever reason. I don't know if I was like swinging my arms or doing whatever, but I remember that thought of just like, you are not allowed to do that. You need to imitate the guys that are around you because that's the way that you are supposed to act. And that's not something that's inherent to, a trans identity. This is not me being over here conflating that, behaviors and gendered preferences and things like that are what indicate, a trans identity. But the reason that those things are talked about so often is because those are the markers that we easily recognize. And often it's because, we as children have very, very distinctive, just role models, and none of mine were men. And it very strongly shows, not just who you want to be, but who you see yourself as deep, deep down.
I've always wondered about, they talk about girl toys and boy toys and girl colors and boy colors. What are your feelings on that?
It's a bunch of baloney, it's, I think that, girls and boys by nature can be drawn to different things, kind of, like a bell curve. Most girls are drawn more towards things that have emotional connections with each other. I personally was, drawn to a lot of the boy toys because they're fascinating. They're interesting. They, tap into those parts of young minds. But like when my sister, wanted me to play dolls with her, that was also something very much that I was just like, yes, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, cool. Let's do that. And so yeah, I think that a lot of people very much feel constrained by those roles, by like boy toys and girl toys. I do think it's kind of ridiculous. At this point in my life, would call myself a tomboy because I do still have a lot of quote unquote boyish interests. I am I'm into computers and programming. Like that's what I do, for my day-to-day job. I am sporty. I like being outdoors and kind of rough and tumble. Like I do contact sports. And it's engaging and validating in a big way, because I felt when I was a kid almost as though I was kind of forced into those activities, like expected to uphold those things, and it never felt right. But now, that I have found myself a lot more in my, feminine identity, it allows me to feel comfortable embodying the parts of those things that I enjoy, like wearing my hair in a ponytail most of the time, and being on sports teams and engaging in somewhat masculine behaviors when they're not, necessarily being shoved down my throat.
What was it like growing up? Where did you go to school, etc.?
Like specifics, like in the place, or I
mean, you can just you can say I grew up in Springfield or whatever.
I did not grow up in Springfield.
Oh, okay.
I grew up in Southeast Missouri, in kind of a rural place, and did not have any role models at all whatsoever that I could look to and say, oh, this person is like me. In fact, I remember being in high school and having a friend tell me what the words gay and lesbian meant, because I was very, very out of the loop at that point, and very just like somebody had said, no, somebody was making fun of me. Somebody was making fun of me because during lunch I had fallen in with a group of friends who liked to play cards. They had an open classroom. There was a teacher sponsor, and she and the students that went would play cards over lunch. And I was like, that sounds like fun. I'm going to go do that. And I did do that occasionally with those folks. And when I was talking to a friend about it at one point, they were like, oh, you hang out with the lesbians. And I was like, what does that mean? And I find it very, very prophetic now, because I guess I had at that point found my people without even really realizing it, because at that time I was just like, huh? Like, no, like what? They're cool. What's wrong?
Right. And so when was that? That was in high school?
Yeah, that was in high school.
Okay.
Yeah, I when I was very, very deeply entrenched into that, you have to act masculine or you're going to be, in a bad place.
So tell me the evolution then.
Of
just when you decided to live your life as a woman. Can you kind of fill me in on that? When did that all happen?
I guess to first clarify terminology, I have always been a woman. And it's, I guess the decision to transition ultimately is the decision that trans people are faced with and make or don't make. Well, I mean, make one way or another. And transition can look different to everybody in plenty of different ways. So I guess kind of my coming out story, is that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I got to... I graduated college. I got to, a point in my life where I was living on my own in an apartment. I had a job. And I kind of, for the first time in my life, had this free, unstructured time just to myself that nobody else had expectations of. No homework, no roommates, no, just anything. And I finally kind of had the quiet time and really the space to think about things. And I started thinking about things a lot because I was sad. I was very sad in college, a little bit in high school, but college, my God, was 4 years of just, wow. And so I got to the point after that where I just was trying to explore that and trying to, figure out what life had in store for me. And I remember sitting on the couch, one afternoon and crying for like 2 or 3 hours and just trying to like what is going on until I just kind of finally unlocked that door inside of myself and my brain said, all right, fine. Like, you want to know, here's what's up. And I realized that I was sad because I was never going to experience the life that I wanted to. And I just kind of knew at my core that meant that I was, a woman, and that I had been repressing this part of myself for nearly my entire life. And my brain had been trying to protect me from it. And that was a big deal. But it was very overwhelming. And I remember just kind of coming to that conclusion and saying, okay, cool, great. At that point in my life, the internet had been around long enough. I'd been exploring different places of it. And side note, the internet is phenomenal for finding communities of people, and finding that support that you need that like you wouldn't get from anywhere else when I was growing up. And I think that's why there is there's a large number of people who are coming out now is because of that connection on the internet. Anyway, I got to a point where I was just kind of sitting with that idea and saying, okay, maybe it's enough just to think about it, and know that in the back of your mind and just live your life, like that will bring you some closure. It really did not. It just kind of boiled and stewed, and I tried not to think about it. And it was December 26th, 2012. I was sitting on the couch surrounded by my mom and my grandma and my sister, and we were watching television, flipping through the channels, and there was a small segment that came on with Lana Wachowski, who is a film director, a transgender film director, and she was coming out in this interview that they were having about this new movie, Cloud Atlas, that they had directed, and she is talking about it and just basically took a moment and said, here's what's going on. Here's why I haven't been, much in the public spotlight. Let's move on and talk about the film. And I was just blown away. I was overwhelmed because she was so poised and so, just human, and was allowed to be human. And at the time in my life, the only thing I wanted to do was to go into film and direct or film or edit or just do whatever. And seeing this woman in this industry being treated with dignity and respect and being herself, and she was gorgeous. And I just remember being in that moment, like everything washed over me like a tidal wave. And I said to myself, oh my gosh, oh Lord, this has to happen. And one of my very, very favorite moments from that is an actual moment that I have in one of the poems that I've written, is that the first person I told was my girlfriend at the time. And I, got on the phone and said, hey, I kind of mentioned this, some months ago, but like, here's the deal. Like, this is a big thing and this is going to happen now. And she paused and she said, okay, I'm going to take a moment and think about that, maybe give me 24 hours. And I said, yeah, no, absolutely. That absolutely makes sense. And it was not 24 hours later. It was 9 a.m. the next morning that she called me up and it was like, hello. And she was like, we are going to be the best lesbians ever.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that was a phenomenal relationship. And she really supported me through a lot of turmoil and a lot of stress, but I absolutely, she is one of the reasons that I have come out on the other end, a happy, healthy human being, that's just living her fullest life,
Your conversation with your parents, how'd that go?
My mom was very shocked and surprised at first, and came around, fairly reasonably quickly, within a couple of weeks. I remember one distinctive thing that she said to me was like, no, like, this isn't, like, you could not have kept something like this from me. To which I responded, Mom, I kept this from myself. This was not a lie to you. This was just a lie to myself, and that I believed,
So I think an initial reaction would be, are you sure? Did she say that? Or
probably, yeah. I've been asked, are you sure? 100 million times, and not, just by other people. I guarantee you, I am the person who has asked myself, are you sure? More than anybody else in the entire world. And there are a lot of people who have asked me that question.
yeah.
And end of the day, it required a bit of a leap of faith, because society has absolutely told me time and time again that I am not, quote unquote, allowed to do this. And I breaking it and finding that permission, not even necessarily from other people, but finding the strength inside of yourself to give yourself that permission is massive. And so, yes, the decision that you mentioned earlier is important. It's an important decision, but it's not a decision that you make once. It's a decision that you make every single day. Transition is not a magic button, unfortunately. It is a decision that you wake up, and like anything else in your life, you say, I'm going to try something new. And if it makes me feel better, fantastic. That's part of me moving forward. If it doesn't, all right, cool. Like, one step back. There's a lot of this entire process that is incredibly, totally not permanent, and is just finding yourself and finding what makes you feel more yourself.
In the last podcast, I interviewed the mom of somebody who as gender fluid. Have you ever thought that perhaps that's what you are, or what pieces of the equation came together for you?
Yes, I at the beginning very much, said I'm really not sure. And so I had read about gender fluid people and non-binary identities, and I very very much was just kind of like, well, that's probably where where I live, because I was kind of hanging on to that. Well, I like all these boyish things, and I feel this way sometimes, and I don't just absolutely hate my body. That kind of came later, actually. It's really kind of funny the ways that, my brain was still protecting me from the worst of it. And how once I got into things, it finally was just like, okay, here's more of this pain that I haven't been letting you see. And I was just like, oh gosh. But at the beginning, I very much thought, maybe that was who I was. And I thought, if I did have this magic button, it would be great, if I could switch it back and forth. But I thought, again, did a lot of thinking, and I sat down and I thought really hard about it. And I imagined myself in that situation. And I thought about pressing it the first time and just how amazing, incredible it would feel. And I thought about, pressing it again. And all of a sudden my brain was like, no, smash it with a baseball bat. And so I was like, okay, you know what? No, I'm not gender fluid. I just am a woman. That's, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So what does that entail? Hormones? Kind of fill me in on that with whatever you're comfortable sharing.
So you're asking, like, what does that entail, like physically, or?
Yeah, don't people take hormones to transition, or?
A lot of people do, yes. A lot of people choose to take hormones, which have, a varying number of effects on the human body. It's actually really fascinating how similar male and female bodies are in the first place, and how just kind of almost on the edge of a razor we all sit, because our bodies regulate a lot of things about ourselves with those sex hormones that would suddenly switch very, very quickly if you introduced a change to the system like that. And there are a lot of people that choose different parts of social transition, voice training, choosing, like, refiguring your style, just a lot of different things. I'm actually I would consider myself a prodigious study of the people around me. I kind of always have been. And going back to the days where I was trying to police myself, trying to watch people and say, oh, this is what you need to do because, because you don't want to be targeted and bullied and things like that. So I turned that around and used it very much to find myself again. I looked at those things and said, what are these things that you have removed from yourself? And I looked to other people, and I very much, emulated the things I saw in the women around me and said, does that feel right? Does that feel like you? Some things, yes, absolutely. Some things, not so much. But it became a lot easier because I was able to pick those things out, And I guess to wrap back around to the medical transition is really what you're referring to, because there are a lot of parts of transition.
Yeah, sure.
But I'm really not sharing. I'm really not comfortable sharing a lot of my personal medical history outside of saying, yes, I take hormones, which consists of originally oral, but at this point injectable, estradiol, and spironolactone, which is an anti-androgen. So yeah. In fact, the biggest challenge that I've had, the first biggest challenge was obtaining access to the medical processes, because originally when I came out, it was required to have a letter from a therapist, to take to a physician who would have to be willing to then, prescribe things. And I ended up going to, I had horrible, absolutely awful luck with the therapist that I had found. And it took me a year and a half to gain access to all of that. At this point, there are so many options for people who are coming out these days, and I find that incredible. There's an informed consent clinic that I can go to and just say, hey, I completely understand the risks. I have studied hours and hours and hours into the risks and the benefits and everything that goes into it, to the point where when the pharmacist first, like gave it to me and said, do you have any questions about this? Like, like about the side effects? And I was just like, no, that's the point. Like
Right.
yeah.
Right.
It's kind of funny how much you have to be an expert on literally like every part of this to be able to talk intelligently about it with people, because there's so many aspects. There are sociocultural aspects. There are scientific medical aspects. There are things that people want to argue about, like where it comes from and things like that. And I feel weirdly like an expert in very specific parts of these huge areas that I've had to do a lot of background research on just to be able to talk intelligently about myself.
I asked the question about surgery or whatever. I think the basic, it's common sense, it's common knowledge. You don't ask somebody about that. What do you say when people do? You were very nice to me, and I wasn't asking you that directly, but it's nobody's business. Can you kind of fill us in on that?
When I talk to people, I end up having a lot of privilege when I talk to people, even as a trans person, because I've been very lucky in a lot of ways. I'm pretty. I am able to pass through society without people, knowing most of the time. Like 90% of the time when I come out to people, they say, "Oh, okay." And so when I am confronted with questions, I feel like I have a lot of that reserve energy to answer those questions. And so I try to take it upon myself to do that if I can. And so when I talk to people about stuff, the things I say are, I have two out of bounds, questions, one of which is, what's in your pants, surgery, questions like that. And the other question is, what was your old name? Because I will not, it's weird. I feel like names have this unusual power over people, and I don't want that to be a part of my identity, as much as I appreciate my parents and the thought that they put into it. And I don't want to leave behind the past parts of myself, but the name specifically is something that I just do not like to hear and have associated with me. So back to your original question, when people do ask me, when they get to that point of saying something about it, usually I try to make them feel, I try to be friendly like I did with you, but I also try to make them feel slightly uncomfortable in the same way, so that they know how uncomfortable a question it is kind of instinctively,
Sure.
And I try and figure out, good ways to do that. But a lot of the times I will come back and try to ask, a probing question about their genitals and say, well, before I answer that, would you please tell me this and this? Or, with some people who are just like, well, let me tell you all about and I'm like, okay, that did not work. But please understand that that's an uncomfortable question and not something that you typically ask.
Exactly.
Somebody in polite conversation.
Exactly. Let's talk about your slam poetry.
Okay.
So I watched a couple of them. How did you get into slam poetry?
Oh, gosh. I don't remember how I first came across it, but I found slam poetry close to the beginning of when I was going through a lot of my transition period. And I found a poet called Andrea Gibson, who is a genderqueer poet who uses they, them pronouns. And I was blown away with the work that they did, that spoke to me on a level that I had never really experienced before. And the more I listened, the more I got into it and had this need to find a creative outlet for all the stress that I was feeling and all of the hard parts, that were coming from going through life as, somebody in a highly maligned minority. So I found slam poetry.
Do you feel like poetry and writing has helped you understand yourself? Has that been part of the process?
I would say so. Yeah. It's forced me to think about things in a way that I definitely did not before, and has given me a lot of that love for myself that I really needed, because when you look at things through a poetic lens, a lot of the time they end up being tragic or euphoric. And if it's down to you to make that decision, a lot of the times I choose both, but finding those places of euphoria in the things that have been traumatic to me has been incredibly healing in a lot of ways.
How do you feel like your life is different than a big majority of people?
I think that everybody is kind of searching for something in their life. It's kind of the human condition. And that's very much been a giant theme of my formative years. And I think one of the most striking and unexpected ways that my life is different from, say, you or a lot of other people out there is finding that El Dorado, is finding that end zone, that place of, this is what I have been looking for, of finding something that makes you so extraordinarily happy that it changes your life. It was very hard. I realize now it was very hard growing up, not feeling like my body was my own, staring into the mirror and getting lost and having out-of-body experiences because my brain could not deal with it a lot of the time. But finding a home in my body has been incredibly cathartic and incredibly euphoric. It just is mind-blowing to me sometimes, the different person that I am now. And that's something I think that we all say at the beginning, is this doesn't change who I am. This does not make me a different person, but that's a lie. I am absolutely a different person. I am a much, much happier person. I'm a much more outgoing, friendly, bubbly person. And I very much feel like that is because I have found, the thing that has been holding me back for so long.
There's a lot of hatred in the world. A lot of people who don't understand, a lot of people who don't want to understand. You could be hateful yourself, but you're not. What do you say to those people?
I don't. I will talk to just about anybody who wants to reasonably discuss it. But if I can see that it's somebody who does not want to understand, I've learned that it's not worth my energy. And so that's one of the one of the things that I do to take care of myself is I disengage and say that's okay. There are people out there who love me, and I don't need you.
And that's kind of the point of this podcast, is to get the message to people who maybe don't want to take the time to understand, who just want to form opinions. I'm not saying all the listeners are like that. There's a lot of open-minded listeners out there. There are very loving people out there, and I've just found love through this whole process.
Wow.
I guess my point is I think there's hope for people out there, and I really appreciate that you are teaching me with kindness, and that you're not just saying, God, you're ignorant, because that would be really easy to do. I mean, it's with any topic. So how do you find the patience for that?
It is not productive to approach people without, kindness and openness in your heart. It is sometimes, necessary, because I can't be this ambassador 24/7, and I do have to pull out when I'm not feeling it. And I think that level of self-care of being able to understand, when I'm not in a good place has been really good. But on top of that, I just love people. And I think people want to love me too. And that's, I think, where I come from, is I want to give them the opportunity to do that as best as they can. And it takes recognizing that they have things that are in the way of that.
What would you say to somebody, whether they're 15 or 50, who they're still trying to find themselves? What would you say to them?
Man, I think I would say just to give yourself space, give yourself that room to really reflect and open your mind and allow yourself to figure out what is inside of you, regardless of what other people say. I was really lucky in that I've had some incredible people to talk to in my life, and they've been much, much more helpful than therapists have to me. But I think therapists can be incredibly beneficial to people in pulling out those things that we hide from. And so I guess my advice would just be to try and figure out how you're hiding from yourself.
Is there anything else you want to add?
Man. No, not really.
I mean, if there's anything that continually comes up that, I mean, this is your chance. Just say it. I mean,
Sure.
If there's anything that you any advice?
I guess, yeah, just, for people who are not feeling the things, that we feel and have no context for that, I think just trust me. That was a big thing. You asked me about my parents, and I don't think I ever touched on my dad.
Right.
Because that was a much bigger kind of thing than it was for my mom, who, like I said, was surprised but came around quickly. My dad wanted to argue with me about it, and argue and argue and argue. And he's a lawyer. That's difficult. That's so intimidating. And he had a lot of questions. And I think that's why I think so hard and become such an expert in things, is because I know, end of the day, if I have something that I need in my life, I have to convince him. And ultimately, it came down to me just living and having to show him. But from the outset, I think what I really just wanted was the benefit of the doubt of, hey, you're an adult, and I trust you, and I trust your intelligence, and I trust that you have thought about this. And if anybody is out there who is struggling with somebody in their life who is saying that they are trans and is going through this, and you don't understand, please just trust that it's something real and something maybe that you don't have context for. And I think that context will grow from your love with your love of that person. And I think it will be something, that you can grow into as well.
Are there people out there who will just decide to say they're transgender and they're not? There's a lot of people who might, but that's not the case, right?
That's one of the things that people have said a lot, especially, parents who quote unquote don't think it's a thing. And I guess what I would say to that is, anybody who gets to this point in their life and says, like, this is who I am, and a parent is genuinely concerned that is not the case, I would just say, trust that they know what they're talking about, and if it's something that they're doing to try and fit in, because that's what their friend group does or something like that, so what? Like, end of the day, let them be who they are. Let them experiment with, their social, like, setting, like, with their name, their pronouns, just like whatever. Like, it's not gonna hurt anybody. If it comes down to like medical transition, like, yeah, that absolutely is something to consider. And I would absolutely want, people to like to really consider that for themselves. But ultimately, I think there are so many more kids who have felt this way for a long time and finally found the courage to come out and say it. And sure, it might seem like something out of the blue for their parents. It did for mine, because I had forced myself to act masculine for so long. But I think there's much more of a danger of a kid not feeling accepted for who they are and not having access to the things that they need to have to transition than it is dangerous that somebody is pretending, you know? So and on top of that, like I said, it's a decision that you make every day. And, it's like even for hormones, there are a lot of effects, you know, that are completely reversible up to a couple of months. And it's like the decision to transition medically is completely up to any person, and their individual decision. But ultimately what it has to come down to is, you know, is this going to make them happier? And it's at a certain point, you do have to trust.
If parents aren't accepting, what are the mental health implications?
When parents don't accept their kids, in any way, shape, or form, it's bad. But especially in this regard, because it's not something that you just feel unsupported, but you find, you know, the strength to carry on, because your parents are your life in a lot of ways. There are a lot of statistics that get thrown around about trans people and suicide. And all of them point to the fact that if a kid feels supported in their home by their parents, that those statistics drop dramatically. That kids who are dealing with something as hard as it can be to go through, as being trans, that ultimately, like, it's difficult, but it is completely doable if you have your family by your side.
I assume the same is true if I'm 45 years old.
Absolutely. You know, just knowing that the people in your life are not going to outright reject you, knowing that they are going to still be there and still love you, not for who they think you should be, but who you are. You know, that is something that we all need. That's something that I needed. And I was very scared, and I'm very glad, because both of my parents are very loving and very supportive. Even if my dad still likes to argue occasionally, I feel like I have people in my life who are gonna be there and who trust me.
Are you happy?
God, yes. I have moments when I wake up and stare at the ceiling and just say, thank God I get to be me.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of In the Shadows. I hope you'll join me for my next guests, Shannon and Brooke.
And what I saw as things developed was there was this girl inside who Chris had been protecting for his whole life. And I can't imagine having to get up every day and act like I'm the other sex. These are the people who deserve Oscars.
In a couple of weeks, I'm going to have the opportunity to visit with a pediatrician about the biology behind being transgender. If you have questions that you would like for me to ask her, please send me a message to the In the Shadows Facebook page. Closing today is Allie with one of her epic slam poems.
A letter to my penis. Hey there, cutie pie. I know we don't talk much anymore. I know we've been doing our best to ignore each other. I know I've been distant for a long time, and I'm sorry. I'm trying to be better. I'm gonna be real right here from the start. I said some things that were meant to hurt. You know, to be honest, we both did. I want to move past that, and I think you do too, but that means we're going to have to work some things through if we want to coexist. We need to get our feelings out in the open. I'll go first. You know, I think it started with puberty, how it rolled in like a thunderstorm. You seemed to know what you were doing, so I rolled with it. There was this spark between us, you know, this energy that I couldn't describe to my other body parts, so I hope you understand how confused I was when we started getting intimate. You wanted to make me feel good, and I thought that was so sweet. You know, your heart was in the right place, but I don't think you ever understood the signals you got from upstairs. You see, it turns out I am the queen of mixed signals. Lots of things turned out jumbled and crossed like wires, or like the dresses I wanted to fit into, crossed like the legs of the other girls in class, but she always shouted when I tried to do the same. God, how you and my brain used to fight. You never listened to each other. You know, that was the problem. You never listened, and I ended up having to choose sides.